like, not interested. But anyway, so yeah, so a lot of the studio spaces I've just been more distanced from because I don't jive with them very well. So.
Yeah, no, also I've seen that it's a very specific kind of studios that open in the university town. If you look at Kingston or where else? I know there's
Ottawa.
Ottawa had one, then it kind of shut the studios that I taught with. So yeah, there's a very specific, almost like a vibe when you go to university town. And if you want to be financially feasible, unfortunately, you gotta cater to the masses. So
yeah, and Waterloo is also like a big tech hub and startup kind of space with Google and all this stuff. So it's very.
Hey folks, it's live stream. Okay.
So now that we're being recorded, I'm like, I'm gonna be quiet.
I mean, the sound quality is okay, right? You can hear me fine. Yeah.
Hari Om Tat Sat. Hari Om Tat Sat. Hari Om Tat Sat. And those are my dogs greeting all of you. All right. So for those of you who are in, who've not been any of my workshops or my talks before, I think my dogs make an entry into every conversation. Okay, so that's almost like an auspicious beginning, and I hope they don't keep it very auspicious throughout. But yes, namaste everyone and welcome. My name is Lubina Rangel Om. And before we begin the session, and I get to introduce our lovely panelists to both of you, to all of you, I will begin with a prayer. Okay, just sitting comfortably. We will begin with 3 Omkaras, followed by the Ganapati Prarthana, or Ganapati Mantra. Sitting comfortably, face soft, body soft, gentle smile in your heart, reflecting on your face. Oh. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Harihi Om. Om Ganana Antva Ganapati Gum Havamahe Kavim Kavinam Upamashravastamam Jyeshtarajam Brahmanam Brahmanaspata Anashrinvannotibhissida Sadanam Mahaganapataye Namaha. Om Prano Devi Saraswati Mat Om Prano Devi Saraswati Vajebhirvajinivati Dhinama Vitryavatu Ano Divo Brihataf Parvatada Saraswati Yajatagantu Yagnyam Vagdevyai Namaha. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. And that's it. Namaste everyone, and welcome to this conversation about keeping yoga authentic. I think the prayer in itself gave us an opportunity, gave me an opportunity to keep this conversation authentic. I think Ma Saraswati came in at that point in time where I had a pause, where there was a glitch. And it is important for us to know that no matter where we are, authenticity comes and presents itself, gives itself as an opportunity, shows itself as an opportunity to us to remind us that we can make mistakes. And on that note, I think it's a blessing to have the Divine Mother with us today in this conversation. Without further ado, we just have about an hour, and I promise we will finish up in 55 minutes going ahead. But first, let me introduce you to the wonderful panelists that we have. We've got Jyoti Solanki-Davie with us, and Jyoti is a nature lover, and she aspires to grow an edible backyard perennial garden using regenerative practices. Her creativity is expressed through many art mediums, and I have seen her artwork, and I have seen the things she does. She even spins her own yarn, okay? Including, but not limited to, fiber arts, photography, video, drawing, design, writing, and expressive movement. She built a career as a registered massage therapist and has worked as a yoga teacher and trainer, both locally in Canada and internationally. A self-proclaimed anatomy nerd, she loves to talk about fascia and the wonders of the human body. And one line that Jyoti has to say is what I will tell you about after I introduce our next panelist, and that's VikramJeet Singh. Vikram is a certified yoga teacher with over 12 years and 11,000 plus hours of teaching experience. He is trained in Hatha, Ashtanga, and Yin Yoga, and is a strong advocate of leading a yogic lifestyle. He is also a trained Ayurveda practitioner from the Kripalu School of Ayurveda in Massachusetts. Besides asana, Vikram also lectures at yoga teacher training and teaches courses and workshops on classical yoga texts, such as Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, Bhagavad Gita, and the Upanishads. With a decade spent in corporate HR and training, Vikram is very passionate about diversity and inclusion and consults yoga studios on inclusive spaces and cultural appropriation in yoga. Vikram is married to lovely Melissa, who is also an Ayurvedic counselor and mindfulness meditation teacher, and they have a lovely 4-year-old daughter, Satya, whom they are striving to raise in a yogic lifestyle. Having moved from Toronto 2 years ago, Vikram and his family live in Goa. And please join me in welcoming both of them, Jyoti and Vikram. And it is my absolute pleasure to have known both of you, Vikram and Jyoti, over the past years, a couple of years for some of you, some months for Vikram, but it feels like it's longer. But to begin this conversation, I'd like to share with all of you that in the posters that you've seen on social media, both Vikram and Jyoti have been described as yoga practitioners, okay? And one of the reasons is that I personally invite people to remind themselves that we remain yoga practitioners throughout. Okay, teachers at different points for different reasons, but practitioners throughout. But more specifically, I asked both Jyoti and Vikram how they would like to be addressed. Okay, and Jyoti in particular said this: I guess yoga practitioner is most suitable. I always find that question hard to answer. Jyoti, why is that such a hard question?
Oh, yeah. It's hard because I feel like the image of what someone who practices yoga is really confused. And so like in terms of what the public sees versus how I feel personally. And so the idea of being called something or being labeled something is always really challenging for me because I feel like I exist outside of a lot of those boxes. And I'll just share specifically when I had finished my teacher trainings. I have 500 hours of training, so on, whatever. My father was like, oh, so are you a yogi? And I was like, no, I'm not. Like, no, I'm not at all. And so I feel like that's an extension of this image of a yoga practitioner as someone who's a yogi. And I have a lot of Vata qualities and I kind of ride those waves at times. And so when I'm speaking, I use my hands and I'm communicating. I'm not always this like image of a Zen, like totally peaceful person. And I've never presented myself like that as a teacher. And as a practitioner, I feel the same way. Like I'm kind of full of all of these ups and downs and riding these different waves. And it's that, like I strive towards that consistency, but I also acknowledge that like my practice exists beyond when I'm just intentionally doing my asana or my meditation or my breath work. It's with me in my garden. And so like, is my garden my yoga practice? In a way, yeah. And so am I a yoga practitioner when I'm gardening? I don't know. So that's kind of where I get confused by it. But I don't know.
Thank you, Jyoti. So I wanted to bring in that question before I actually introduce the need for this conversation to all of you. You see, we, at least at the Kirby Yogi, and we have been speaking about authenticity for a while now. And many of you have been following the posts, you've been engaging, you've been sending messages, and there are other teachers who also speak about this. But authenticity seems to keep coming up. And it's not necessarily, very well understood. Sometimes it's a misunderstood term, and misunderstood because the question still arises, what authenticity are you talking about? Are you saying that only certain people are authentic? Are you saying that only certain practices are authentic? Are you saying that after all the investment that I've done to actually become this yoga teacher, that I am not a yoga teacher? And who are you to actually say that? Who am I? Are we making claims? Are we making tall claims? Are we making legitimate claims? Or are we making just an ask of the community, an ask of YogaLand to some extent, an ask of each other as practitioners to align ourselves towards ethical conduct and ethics, authenticity, authentic ethical behavior for yoga teachers, for yoga practitioners, for all of us? This is something that we are engaging today with our panelists for, to shed some light on. Do we have answers? Maybe not. Do we have, do we have a specific set of, do we have criteria which says this is what authenticity means? Maybe, maybe not. But what we're doing is bringing varied voices, okay, to the debate, to the conversation, not even a debate all the time, to the conversation, to see what are we speaking about. So I see just a little bit of housekeeping over here. the conversation in the chat box is going to come directly to the hosts and the co-hosts. So if you've got any questions, you can put them up here. We will be taking questions and some interactive conversation with you all in the audience for the last 15 minutes. So please put them in. If we feel that the question has been answered in the course of the conversation, then we will skip it. If not, then we would. But then still, for paucity of time, if we cannot take all the questions, then maybe we might answer them later or put a different video, or we'll have some of the panelists address them separately. Okay, but one question that has just come in because I used a term there, and that is, please define YogaLand. YogaLand is a term that was actually, I don't know if it was coined by my friend, for those of you who know Kaya Minlin. I don't know if she's there in the audience yet, but Kaya is the one who defined it, and it's or who used it the first time, but now everyone uses it. So we have to give credit to that teacher. Kaya calls YogaLand, or calls the current contemporary Western space of yoga, which is largely asana based, not really informed and vested in traditional yogic philosophy. Okay, that is, say, maybe Insta yoga in a way, but that's YogaLand, where people are largely asana aware, but not really yoga aware. I think that I think we'll have to ask Kaya to come in sometime and actually give us her version of what YogaLand is, but that is how we use it, at least that's the way I use it right now. So I would like to actually jump right in with my very first question that leads on to what we spoke about just now in terms of the intro. And Vikram, I'd like to start with you. What do you understand by authenticity and authenticity in yoga? What are we talking about?
That's a big question, right? Really big question. So here's my standard disclaimer for anything else that I'll say tonight, is that one of the main reasons, perhaps the only reason why I love the practice of yoga is it's an embodied practice. It's a practice that exists within me. It's not something, I mean, I can pick up a book and quote from it, but that would not be embodied, right? So my caveat, my disclaimer is, as I share my thoughts, let them land with you, see how they sit with you, see where they sit in your embodied sphere of existence. And anything that I'm saying comes from my own embodied experience, which has its own set of limitations. So having said that, I think in order to define anything as authentic, to define anything as original, it would be impossible to do that without separating it from its earliest context, from its origin, from its history. So to put it simply, if you ask me, what does authenticity in yoga means? It would mean that in the form that it's being, I'm just going to stick with practicing and leave the teaching aside. In the form that one is practicing it, it has some semblance to the original context, to the original goal, to the original state, that would be able to trace it back at its origin and say that, yes, this in some way, I understand that timelines are not linear, at least not in yoga history, but there is some sort of a line that can weave all the way back to a practice. Oftentimes we get stuck in, oh, this is traditional. And the examples here are like 100 years old. That's my grandfather's time. That's not traditional, that's, I think for most of you, your grandparents' time. To me, traditional would be 2,500 years ago, 3,000 years ago. At least let's go with 1,500 years ago. So something that spawns from that time has been codified, has been passed down from generations, and the big one, has in the past and continues to impact civilization after civilization, society after society, with that unbroken lineage of knowledge, in my mind, what can be classified as authentic. I think everything else, modern yoga, modern partial yoga, these are terms that are thrown around pretty loosely. And the time frame of that is 100, 150 years, right? So I'm obviously speaking at a time prior to that, prior to innovation, prior to this global landscaping of yoga, if you will.
I think, Vikram, you touched upon something that is very important when it comes to the unbroken lineage. You see, when we talk about tradition, many people, so traditions are something that we also have in our families, right? So we do have family traditions of certain practices, and we say that we learn from our families, and that is also a part of the living culture of Bharat, or of India, or of this subcontinent, that we do have the living culture that's conveyed within our families. But it's important to understand that when we speak in terms of authenticity, that lineage, or that unbroken authenticity, is not necessarily the thing that we only learn from within our families, because they are also subsets of it. And within families, it's almost like sometimes when I speak about pickle recipes, right? The pickle recipes that our grandmother would send down, and then you've got 10 different siblings, and I say 10 because you would have them, and 10 different siblings would have one tiny variation that's there. So which is the original recipe? And that's why within families, the tradition changes, or it's got its own flavor. But when it comes to education, and that is the one that stands the test of time, the unbrokenness of it, the one that goes beyond just the 100 years. And this is an important part in contemporary yoga conversation, because presently there are many teachers, or people who call themselves teachers, who rely on or showcase the past two generations, the past one generation of their family practices as the practice which defines what yoga is. And that is incorrect in many ways. That is incorrect to say that this, because my parents did this, this is what it is, whereas it may not be the case. We have to understand that within families also traditions change, and that's where I'm coming into Jyoti's question. I mean, asking Jyoti here. Jyoti, you've also been part of diaspora. You are part of diaspora even now, and I know because of our conversations, how you're connected with yoga within your family line, and with your grandfather and all of that. And how does all of this come in, and how does authenticity ring a bell for you, both as someone who has it in the family, as well as someone who's working through lineage?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm going to touch on what Vikram was saying with regards to embodiment, and my own, so for example, when I first decided to dedicate myself to having a daily sadhana, it was shortly after my dada had passed away, and he was the one who kind of was practicing all the time in our family, and everyone looked at him as the one that was doing it. But they're really just like memories from when I was younger. So that when I started practicing Surya Namaskar, it was just like, oh, this is how I'm doing it. And I just did like some basic asana, and I didn't really know what I was doing. And then it wasn't until I started experiencing technically YogaLand studio spaces where I had friends who were becoming teachers, and they're like, can you come and be a student so I can graduate? And I'm like, okay. And it was this hot studio. We were doing these things, and I was like, it didn't feel like yoga. I was like, this is interesting, because as a person who was a dance, like I studied ballet, jazz, and tap when I was young. And so I love movement. I love dancing and expressing myself that way. And so I could do the asana that they were doing because I was flexible and strong, and I could learn the choreography. And that was something that I saw from there on. It was just like every space I went into was mostly some combination of this performative movement practice where the teachings of yoga were so under the surface. You had to look really, really hard to find them there. And for me, like, I felt like I carried them into these spaces so I could connect in a level where I was like, oh yeah, this is my practice. But I didn't receive any actual teachings or any insights from most of those spaces. And so for me, it's this like, there's like a spark of knowing within myself when I'm in the right space, but then also because like as a massage therapist, I love talking about anatomy. And so there's a lot of that happens in these spaces, which I think is great because the general public needs to know how their body can work and how they can connect to it. But because of that, it's almost like too heavily in this anatomical study and exercise science kind of realm. And so there again, I'm like, where's the yoga? Because I'm enjoying this, but it's not really yoga. And so for me, authenticity is like a feeling that I experience. And that's really hard to like qualify for someone else, right?
Yeah, and that's a great place to, you know, to put that pause in both of those in what you just said, because now I'm going to ask both of you, you know, then what is missing? What is missing in that doesn't make it authentic? Vikram, any thoughts?
It's a hard one. It's a hard one because I wish I could pinpoint and say this is missing. You know, it would be an easy answer for me to say, oh yeah, more philosophy. You know, let's shift the focus from asana, let's do more philosophy. But that would be an easy answer. If I was to take an educated guess, I think what is missing is a collective sense of responsibility towards what is being taught, practiced, and most importantly, marketed as yoga. I think that's missing. If I think 174 nations said yes, you know, when the International Yoga Day was proposed in the United Nations, you know, so that kind of consensus, you know, if everybody, if I could wave my magic wand, and at least the ones who call the shots, the ones who sit in these positions of power, the ones who are influencing the way yoga is spreading globally, North America, Europe, and India, I wish there could be some sense of collective consciousness, collective responsibility that came together and said, hey, we have something that is really good. And we have this responsibility to preserve it and maintain it. And we should collectively work towards it, you know, not necessarily stripping it of everything, but kind of almost creating this cohesive model that has not strayed so far and so out there from what it is. I think that collective responsibility is missing. And it should not be mine because I chose to or because I'm Indian. You know, it should be a collective responsibility for everybody who is part of this conversation. And I think that's a lot of people, right? Like 30 million practitioners. I think if I take a guess, maybe more worldwide. So yeah, I think that desire to be responsible, that desire to care is missing, I feel.
Yeah, that's great. I do have something to add, but I want to hear what Jyoti has to say because she said something was missing anyway. So Jyoti, what do you think is missing?
Yeah, I feel like that balance between marketing and like the teachings themselves and this conflation that we have in the business itself is that missing link between one's heartfelt desire for that practice and then this like business side of things where you have to be this performer who knows how to use technology and can promote themselves and has the microphones and like has all the things necessary. Like it's like this big step that you need to take, or a leap it's like there's so many little steps that can be in between, and that's where the practice is for me. And so I feel like a lot of what's missing is the dedication to the practice as opposed to being like, oh, I'm qualified now, I'm gonna present myself as whatever authority. And I like, if I had a magic wand, it would really be that the industry wasn't making billions and billions of dollars from this, and so that it's not attractive for the average like just like an average person who's just like, oh, maybe this is where I can make some money from it. You know what I mean? Like it's not attractive in that way, where like maybe they want to actually just become a personal trainer, for example. So.
Yeah, no, that's so true. When it comes to both collective responsibility as well as the, you know, how it is marketed, how it is portrayed today. You know, there are two things that come up in this for me: collective responsibility, right? And and the behaviors that are involved. I think responsibility and the behavior goes hand in hand. I think at this point, it's and I'll break the conversation. I'll break that question up so that we can give adequate time to both of them. And we will begin actually with the responsibility. What are we talking about here? Who is responsible for maintaining the authenticity? Now, for a lot of last year, for a larger part of last year, there was a lot of conversation that I was, spearheading and saying that the responsibility does lie with teachers. Okay, with teachers, because teachers of various caliber do have the responsibility, or that they also are role models. Okay, so there is this swadharma, and there is the dharmic aspect of yoga in itself, which asks us, which not just asks, it demands of us this responsibility towards society, right? So we have to stand in as role models. Role models, not necessarily to, say, do everything that I do, but then we might as well actually behave that way. We might as well truly embody what any of this is asking of us. So I focused a lot initially on teachers, okay? But then it was just as important in contemporary times to not only hold teachers responsible, because when we're having adult practitioners, sadhakas, then a good portion of that onus, of that responsibility for one's own spiritual growth is also on us, upon ourselves. And we can't just completely disregard that and say, hey, it was the teacher, right? It's not always the teacher. So how do you see this responsibility? Where, according to you, does that teaching or that responsibility to level authenticity lie? Vikram?
That's it's a tricky situation right now. It's a tricky situation right now because no matter how, I'm going with the assumption that there's a lot of discernment that's present in a student per se, right? Your average student wants to be a yoga teacher, wants to teach yoga, maybe part-time, maybe deepen their practice, maybe for their livelihood, all the basic reasons, give or take, at least some of the reasons why I wanted to be a yoga teacher. And then when you go out there and you look, I guess there would be a lot of factors that would prompt one to choose where they would end up learning how to teach yoga, right? So much as I'm all about the student having that discernment, either that student is an experienced practitioner or has some level of awareness as to where they should be headed on this journey, or they are someone who is looking towards mainstream media and trying to make a decision. They're trying to look at a popular voice and make a decision. They're trying to look at a huge billboard and make a decision, maybe Yoga Journal and make a decision, maybe Yoga Alliance's top 10 teachers. I'm just randomly saying stuff. I don't even know these things exist. But that's who your average student is looking at, right? And I don't know if the ball can firmly sit in their court, because if I am coming from a very limited scope of knowledge, where like any product that's advertised well, and it's advertised and sold to me, I'll buy it. So yeah, I want to say yes. I'm all about the student having that authority, having that responsibility, having that sense of discernment. But I don't know, the current playing field is not designed for that to happen. It's designed for the opposite to happen. It's designed for the, 150K plus follower teachers hitting your sponsored ads and so on and so forth, right? So the ones who are not famous enough, are not popular enough, kind of get sidetracked, and the students would never see them, literally and otherwise, So that's why I said, when I was speaking about the missing piece, about that responsibility, that switch needs to happen within the student 100%. But the way things are right now, there's an external factor as well.
Oh, you and I have spoken about this so many times, and you know how strongly I feel about how teachers present themselves. In fact, many of you in the audience who are my friends, my students, we've had these conversations multiple times, because as a teacher, as someone who works with this all the time, I feel the pain, right? I feel the pain, not just for me, but I feel the pain for my students, even the potential students, or even students of other teachers. There goes my dog again, okay? But the pain is because when you present something incorrectly, and then like Vikram says, you speak through the one, or you speak through the loudest mic because you have the loudest mic, you have the largest platform, and you're the only one getting heard, then that misinformation, and I can't help saying that it is misinformation because it is very well marketed misinformation. When that goes out, it's easy for people to get confused. Now, I'll come back to this term discernment. Discernment isn't easy, okay? Discernment is one of the highest qualities that a yoga practitioner aspires towards. It would be naive, ridiculous, and fraudulent also for me to sit here on this platform with all of you and say, hey, we can all discern. We cannot. We have to really utilize the capacity to discern. So when our decision making is clouded by marketed voices, then there's a problem. Jyoti, what do you have to say to that?
The whole idea of marketing and the way propaganda works, like I think that's something that that even beyond yoga, we all need to be much more aware of how impactful that is in every aspect of our life, but specifically yoga and the responsibility there. I think of a couple of things. And so I definitely don't feel like yoga should be regulated, but speaking from a regulated health profession in Canada, we have an obligation to educate the people who come for massages about their rights to say no, and like the whole informed consent with regards to what the treatment will entail. I feel like that's completely missing from a lot of these spaces, is this informed opportunity to consent to, buying into a $4,000 teacher training. It's like you sign up thinking I'm going to get this information or knowledge or insight, and then you get something else. And I personally looked really hard for a YTT to study in. I was in a position where I couldn't travel very far. This is before Zoom and stuff, but I ended up finding a woman who no longer lives close to me, but at the time she did. And we did it kind of one-on-one, which was remarkable and very rare in these kinds of spaces. And she worked out of her home. And so this was an opportunity for me to grow. And it was also an opportunity for me to witness how different the teachings can be presented. She didn't have a ton of people that were coming through training. She was doing it all by herself. And there was definitely some things with the way she was teaching and what she was teaching that I was like, I'm not sure how I sit with that. But at the same time, the comparison to what I was witnessing in these other spaces where that lack of responsibility, because all we want to do is churn out more students. And I wonder, where are all of these opportunities for students just to learn, just for the sake of the practice, as opposed to the end goal of becoming a teacher? Because then you have this end goal that you then are responsible for perpetuating the same thing that was happening to you anyway. So I feel like that responsibility is on both the student and the teacher, and that both students and teachers need to remember that the digital, like the visual impact that we're having from all sorts of mediums that we're digesting are going to shape our reality. And if that's shaping your reality to think that yoga is purely asana or purely these movements, then my hope is that people will start to recognize that like, oh, I'm feeding myself something that's not actually helping me to grow.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of my prayers for my students really is that I hope they can see the difference. Unfortunately, many of them cannot. And you say that, and then you still see them consuming utter rubbish at times. And I have to say utter rubbish. I can't be less judgmental, because I can see the spiritual trash, or trash in the name of spirituality, trash in the name of yoga, that is being fed to them, and at a cost that people work and they earn, that's hard-earned money and time and trust that is given to these spaces, and it's lost. Over the past couple of days, there has been one particular account on my Instagram that has practically been trolling with comments, challenging the need for the authenticity, challenging the conversation, challenging the very essence of what we are asking for in terms of authenticity. And it began, so yes, it does have a political lens to it. It does have cultural appropriation. It has all of the flavors of all of these isms that we have. But the bottom line was that this individual was stating that they are an RYT 500. It was easily Krishnamacharyaji's name was being dropped. I am a student of Krishnamacharya, right? But the basic understanding of the Yoga Sutras was missing. The basic quality of humility in a teacher and a student was missing, because they were coming in with a challenge and saying that what you're asking, what you're stating about the Vedas is bullshit. That's exactly the word that was used. Okay. And my point at that point, my understanding is that how does this make one a yoga teacher? If the very basic information, the tiniest nugget of knowledge is not presented in your first 2 or 3 days in a yoga teacher training, then what is the point of having spent 500 hours or 5,000 hours in a yoga teacher training, having a yoga business in the United States, making money from it and profiting of it also, but not having this information, but still being a yoga teacher, right? Now, I come to a point, what we usually speak in terms of authenticity, and that is adhikara. Adhikara is eligibility, not qualification. Okay. And I want to say that very clearly for all of you in the audience. Adhikara is not the Hindi word, for those of you who are Indians, for the right. It's not the right to teach. And neither is it the right to learn, which is a very contemporary, non-indigenous way of saying that, hey, I have the money for this fee. I have the money to pay for this, so you have to teach me. No, adhikara is an eligibility to learn. Do you have the required skill set, the qualifications, or the qualities that make you eligible, ready, and prepared to take in this wisdom and knowledge? And if you don't, are you just going to say, hey, listen, I don't need your jnana, I don't need your jnanam, I don't need your wisdom. You just take the fee that you are charging and teach me. But you're not going to get it. And just as well, we have an adhikara or a quality or that makes a teacher eligible to teach not just one topic, but multiple topics. What is that teacher eligible to teach? And we all know that an RYT 200 is going to give us a certificate with tiny piecemeal bits of different topics and say, hey, there you go. Now you're a teacher. Now you can teach. And it is this kind of a teacher who would troll the Kavi Yogi's Instagram account and say, what the hell are you talking about? You have no clue what you're talking about. You have no right to come and tell me that I should not be teaching yoga. And for those of you who know me, I call that bullshit. And I actually come and say, well, you're not eligible to teach. You are ignorant. And as an ignorant person, you do not have the right to cause spiritual harm to people. That's what I do, unapologetically. So on that note, Vikram and Jyoti, how do we take this on? How do we actually, do we actually call in? Do we actually call in, or do we just stand? Do we just stand in alignment with what is ethically correct? How do we actually invite students to think, what is authentic teaching? Where does this come from? Where do we find these teachers then? Where do we find these teachers? And for those of you in the audience, if you can have any points or any thoughts in this, please drop them in the chat box, because I can see some of the comments coming in. So if you have any questions, or if you have any comments or answers to any of these, I'll be reading them at the end. So just go right ahead. But where do we find these teachers, Vikram? Because someone asked me once, I think sometime last week, they asked me, yeah, well, who certified you, Luvina? And yeah, who certified me? I'll answer that, but where do we find these teachers?
Where do we find these teachers? If I was a practitioner who had recently finished my YTT, right? So I have some exposure, some information that's been shared with me under the restraints of a time frame and hours per curriculum and topics to be covered and so on and so forth, right? So I'm kind of like let loose, right? I finished my YTT and here I am. And my experience so far has been with all of the instructors who taught me, right? Whatever they taught me in my 200 hours. I guess where would this person go, right? They would go to the next best thing at the end of it, which ironically we are on right now, the internet, social media, maybe print. I'm not sure. I haven't picked up a yoga magazine in a while, but maybe in print, depending on who they did their teacher training with. Maybe they were given a list of resources, of courses to do, teachers to study with, books to read, translations to read. So it's hard. I wish there was one clear answer I could say that, oh, a student who is out looking for a teacher, a qualified teacher, a teacher with adhikara should go here. Unfortunately, that unified platform or that one-stop shop does not exist. There's lots of shops that exist in yoga land, but a one-stop shop for qualified teachers unfortunately does not exist, right? So it kind of puts back things in that little circle that we find ourselves in. Is it'll come back again. The onus will be a little bit on us, folks who are interested in having these conversations, panel participants, people who follow similar accounts, have a voice on those conversations, people who are actively seeking that change and are not shy to speak about it, and people who are willing to maybe take the next step and say, hey, you know what, this does not exist. Well, maybe it's about time it does. So there's a few things there. And the last thing I would say, to something that Jyoti said earlier, I've always had these mixed feelings about yoga being regulated. At the end of the day, that also has a slippery slope. Who can authorize anybody on satya, on ahimsa? There is only one satya. There's only one relative truth. Everything else is there's only one absolute truth. Everything else is relative. This meeting will not be the truth in 20 minutes from now. So there's some things that no one can certify you on. So it makes the regulation hard. But I definitely think, to kind of close loop what I'm saying to this question is some sort of a more rigorous model that differentiates between someone who has just finished their 200-hour YTT and bears the title of a teacher, as opposed to someone who is sitting with further education, a postgrad, more hours, more, think about it. Would you see a brand new dentist? Even they went to college for 5 years, I'm guessing 5-6 years. You would say, how long have they been practicing before you sit in someone's chair? And that's 5+ years of med school. I just picked up the first thing that came to my mind. But we are willing to trust someone who just finished 200 hours and we don't even know from where. So there's a huge gap. There's a huge gap in terms of transference of knowledge. And I don't know specifically what that looks like, but I think this conversation and many such conversations and the desire to quasi semi-regulate or make that distinction, if everyone's a yoga teacher, that kind of doesn't serve the purpose. And everybody can be a yoga teacher. It's a free world. If someone would like to be a yoga teacher, that's their prerogative. But that differentiation is needed, at the risk of, everyone says yoga is union, at the risk of sounding slightly divisive, that differentiation is needed, Maybe I'll use Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, right? Maybe I'll go the Kaivalya side. So we need a little bit of differentiation here.
Yeah, I think we need to have a whole new panel discussion on yoga is union, because the yoga is union thing is one of the largely touted that conversation, because ask them to show me where in the Yoga Sutras yoga is union. In fact, question for all of you, show me where in the Yoga Sutras it is written that yoga is union. All right, and I'll invite you to be my panel, my panelist in the next conversation. But Jyoti, before you go on ahead, talking about regulation here, and I can see that Rashida has also put that over there, right? Who are regulators? Who are these regulators? Who are they? Is it Yoga Alliance? How long have Yoga Alliance been in existence? How long have they been practicing? Who have they been practicing from? When have they started practicing? And as an outsider organization that capitalizes, right? Capitalizes, that charges money from Indian teachers without a subsidy. Okay, they profit off yoga, and everyone in India pays the same price that everyone in the rest of the world, currency conversion notwithstanding, pays, right? And we are regulated. And then yoga is further reduced to whatever it is today. And then we have people in India who are trying to also make a living and say, yeah, you know what, I think we need to just follow that lead and do what everyone wants to come and do. It's cheaper for them to come to YTTs in India, so let's just give them what they want, right? But who are these regulators and where do teachers learn from? I think one very important differentiating factor is that an RYT 200 usually makes people eligible, right? Or qualified and certified to go and teach. But that's just a starting point, because you've just been given tiny nuggets of everything. But teachers who really are pursuing authenticity are still learning, right? And we learn from teachers, we learn from schools, and we learn from lineages that do not even give us a certificate. So to the question to that individual who once asked me something, and last week he asked me, who certified you? Yes, I do have a number of certificates. I do. I've got a number of certificates which now are just piled up somewhere, right? But my learning, my teaching comes from teachers who come and sit with me 5 hours every week, but do not come and give me a certificate. Whom I've been learning from year after year, but there are no certificates. In fact, there are some of you in the audience who have been learning with me for a couple of years now, who have not received any certificates. And so certification is not the point. And regulation is incumbent on dharma, on ethical alignment. Jyoti, what are your thoughts?
Well, the whole topic of regulation, yeah, and like Yoga Alliance and the International Association of Yoga Therapists, I had reached a level of qualifications to open up my own therapeutic school when I made the decision that I don't want to teach anymore, that I want to focus more on just being a student, and maybe one day I'll teach again, but right now it's no. But I thought it was absurd that you just needed to accumulate X number of hours to be qualified, and that there's no responsibility on their part. That's where I was like, okay, because as a regulated health profession, massage therapy has, like, as a therapist, I have responsibility beyond just paying my dues. And if I don't live up to like the standards that I'm supposed to as a therapist, I can get my registration revoked. There's nothing like that in Yoga Land. And I feel like there shouldn't be some authoritative body that's going to now like do this to people. But I feel like our individual ethics need to be checked. When we're a teacher, when we're a student, how are we, in terms of like searching for that teacher? Like, I truly feel like there's going to be a process of that unfolding for each individual. And the kind of the bottom line for me is that, why did you come to this practice in the first place? And so a lot of people, whether they're teachers or students, I like to remind them and myself, like, why did you want to learn about yoga? Like, what brought you to this space? And to be honest, if it was because your physical body is injured or like has an imbalance, go seek professional help, not just from someone who has a 200-hour training, because you won't be able to get the care you need. And if you're suffering with like mental instabilities and things like that, again, like find someone who is qualified professionally, and or like if it's a yoga practitioner, someone who has experience with working with that. And then if you're truly like seeking, if you're a true seeker, don't just go to an asana class expecting to find the answers there. Go, like, keep looking, keep searching for that teacher. Because, and I mean, I think this was like a bit of a, what's the phrase, like a quirky, or not quirky, that like this phrase gets tossed around a lot, like, oh, when the student's ready, the teacher will appear. But I think that, like, to agree, that's true, because I was searching for like 12 years for someone to teach me some basic mantra and Sanskrit, and finally Lubina showed up. And so it was just like, I had to wait until the technology was there for me to have Instagram or whatever. And so I think that time is something that we all need to embrace as well as practitioners and teachers, and then in that acknowledge that, yeah, it might take you a long time to get there, and that's okay too.
Yeah, you're right. You know, I want to bring in a couple of points here. One is that ethnicity is not an equivalent for adhikara. Ethnicity is not an equivalent for eligibility. You do not have to find an Indian teacher and say that that teacher has the adhikara to teach you. Okay, so ethnicity, and I repeat this. Do not look at a social influencer, a social media influencer who is brown, and say that they have the adhikara to teach you yoga, because a number of them are peddling you trash. They are. Okay, that's one thing. Secondly, there was a question here from Namita Sudarshan. And thank you, Namita ji. That's a brilliant question, because she asks, who determines that a person has the adhikara to teach yoga? Who determines adhikara? Now, adhikara is a term, a concept, a practice. It's a concept that is rooted in parampara and sampradaya. Okay, that is the lineage and the tradition, the methodology of how something is taught. For an individual, for a teacher, for a student to have the eligibility, yes, you know, that when you approach a teacher who is within that tradition, they recognize, you know, is something missing here? Is this person able to comprehend, to perceive what is being taught? Sometimes it begins with something simple. So if you go to ashrams, then sometimes one student or one sadhaka will receive, say, maybe instructions to go and water the garden, right? And someone else will get the instruction to just come and sit and listen to the lectures, right? You don't go and argue and say, hey, listen, I've just come here for a 1-month ashram visit and you want me to go and water the garden. That is what the teacher sees that you require. Okay, so that is as a student. And there are many other ways, right? How are you accepted into a program? How are you accepted into a learning program? We just have our Sadhaka enrichment program that is coming to a close next month. We had over 50, close to 60 people who applied, and I sifted through. I mean, we've got faculty here. I can see Rahi ji here as well, and she has also asked me about it. And I said, no, I just took in about 10 students. Okay, and from those 10 students, there were some who couldn't attend. Why? There were things there were gaps that needed to be filled. There were some practices, there were some teachings that needed to be received before you are actually eligible to come and sit in these classes and not feel that your time is wasted. You need to have, you need to come in with a space of humility. You need to come in with a space of learning, with the desire to understand. But these are not just it. There are many other nuances involved. But who gives you the adhikara to teach? Now, for that, you need to come as that student with that adhikara to learn, to have that humility to learn, and learn in a systematic methodology which holds, like Vikram said at the beginning, holds that unbroken knowledge to you, taught to you in contemporary ways, and taught to you in a way that you understand completely. You can't have an if and but and say, hey, you know what, maybe I will brush up on this when I teach tomorrow. No. You need to know it. So there are ways, there is a process of learning. You begin with Shravanam. Shravanam is the listening part. You're just listening to what the teacher is saying. After you've listened to it, you move through the next stage, that is Mananam. And Mananam is where now you're allowing yourself to reflect on what you've learned. You're allowing yourself to contemplate, to think what's going on. And when you're doing that, you'll have doubts. You'll go back to your teacher and say, you taught me this, I've been thinking, but I have a doubt and I need clarification, as opposed to, I think what you're saying is wrong. That is the difference. Contemporary students assume that the teacher needs to tell them what they want to hear. That isn't true. Your teacher is there to help you within the lineage. That's why authenticity. Your teacher is there to teach you in a way that you'll understand that which will take you to the next level of doubtless knowledge. Knowledge without doubts. That is when you embody it, and that stage is nididhyasanam. Once you've come to that level, that you've heard something, you've reflected upon it, then you've embodied that doubtless knowledge, or that knowledge without a doubt. When you embody that knowledge without a doubt, then maybe, if you are meant to, you may be given the adhikara, or you may have earned the adhikara to teach. On that note, there are a number of things that I teach, but I teach the things in bits and pieces that my teachers have given me the adhikara to teach. There are some parts of it that I do not teach. I do not teach Sankhya philosophy because my teachers have not yet told me, okay, Lavina, you know it all, go and teach it. No, I do not teach Sankhya philosophy. Okay, but I do teach the Yoga Sutras. I do teach Veda chanting. In Veda chanting, there are certain Vedas, there are certain Suktas that I teach, not all, because I am still learning. Every Wednesday and Thursday morning, I learn with my Acharya. I study, right? So that is where that adhikara comes from. It is not self-assumed. I do not just suddenly pick up a book today that I've read and say, I like this book. I'll just, prepare a course on it tomorrow and let's teach it from next week. Registration's open, everyone. Deadline next Thursday. Doesn't work that way. That is not what adhikara is. Saying that is not being authentic, right? At this point, I will just quickly go through it, and Jyoti and Vikram, please feel free to add points. Just let me have a look at any questions and thoughts that are here, okay? Even if it comes to adhikara, Vikram, Jyoti, please take it on from here because we've got, I'd like to hear. All right, so maybe if you're still thinking, if you've got something to say, maybe I will quickly look at this. Natesh Ji says, yoga is a realization, which is an outcome of truth and continuous flow. Everything else is simply subtle practice. Okay, so that which is practice can be taught. That which is practiced, yes, you need to have practiced it. You can't just teach it without the practice. Collective sense of responsibility. Anuji is, reiterating that. Who is teaching realization? That would be truly authentic. Yes, and we should also understand that different teachers teach us different things, different parts of the practice. We will also come across people who are not teachers in the real sense, but who teach us everything about what a teacher should not be. And that's the problem. The problem is that it distracts us and detracts us from the path, right? It's a waste of time. And we just have a finite amount of time with us. Why would we want to waste it? As students, I feel that it is our responsibility also to look and ask questions. If you have a question for me right now in the audience, if you want to know who my teachers are, ask me and I will tell you. I learned Vedanta from Ravi Ishwaran Ji. Right? Ishwaran Ji's father has got a number, he's a mystic who's written a number of books on the Bhagavad Gita, on the Upanishads, and his son, Ravi Ishwaran Ji, is my Vedanta teacher. I study Veda chanting with Niranjan Bhattji, who is from the Sringeri Parampara. Okay, and from that lineage of where I am taught and where I have the adhikara to teach the mantras that I learn. I am from the Karma Sannyasin lineage of Bihar School of Yoga. My teacher is Pradeep Sattvamaya, who is the direct disciple of Swami Niranjanananda Saraswati. I have been initiated by Swami Satyasangananda Saraswati of Rikyapit, also of Bihar School of Yoga. And these are teachers who have significantly taught me what to teach and how to be. In addition, I have also have had friends and mentors in Swami Dharmakirti Saraswati of Atmadarshan ashram in Bangalore, where Swami Yogaratna Saraswati is a dear friend of mine, and she has her ashram in Gokarna. And I associate with a number of other teachers who have helped me along the way, who refer to me as their peers. You can learn from your peers, but you need to seek authenticity. You need to seek that these are teachers who are not teaching just to make a quick buck, that they are here to actually see the spiritual progress of people around them. And that is why this ask for authenticity today, it's almost like what's that? What's that feeling? Rahi, you've heard me say this before. What's that feeling? Okay, let me quickly read through. Poonamji says that she uses the word integrity. Yes, integrity is very, very important. We need to have integrity towards yoga, towards ourselves, towards the students. Daniel says that perhaps responsibilities of students are incumbent on those who've developed a sense of discernment. Even if we're not teaching, but being role models. How do you be a role model? You be a role model when you're actually living in that sense of yama and niyama that we have, at the very least, right? Vikram and Jyoti, please unmute yourselves. Just pitch in. Just pitch in, because I need to read some of these things. There's such this beautiful thought being presented here. Karen Carlson says, and this is a great one. Okay, so let me read this. I think we have to find teachers who are actually invested in relationship with their students, personal relationship. They know your name. They're interested in your circumstances. They know your family situation. They adapt what they are offering based on you, not content creators, but teachers. This has to mean one-to-one relationship and transparency. Karen, thank you for that. For those of you who are my students in the audience who are here, please, I think this is a moment where I get to tell all of you how much I am grateful for all of you and how much I love all of you. Okay. Right.
Add in that, and I'll add into that because in my experience over the last decade, it's been striking where that teacher ghosted completely. And it's like, I'd email them and no reply. And compared to authentic relationships with my teachers where I can message them and they're just like, hey, it's like we're having just a regular conversation, like two regular people. And so, yeah, I think that's a big tell is how are they communicating with you, and how, are they keeping you at arm's distance, or do they welcome you in?
Vikram, thoughts?
I think that's a great point. It is about the relationship, right? I know that we don't live in the Upanishadic era, we necessarily, even afraid to say the G word, the guru shishya relationship, right? I know we live in a different society, different time now, but I think that relationship is very important because it's an embodied practice. So outside of the script, outside of a commentary, outside of a translation, we have access to any commentary you want. You can have it in multiple formats, in print, in Kindle, so on and so forth. So we are living in a very intellectually rich time, but that's just word. That word has to be spoken and embodied and shared. And I think that's a great point that any sort of studies in any capacity, that relationship is of utmost importance.
Thank you for bringing the Guru Shishya Parampara. I think this conversation in itself would not have been possible without having the Guru Tattva present right here in all of us. I think by invoking Ma Saraswati at the beginning itself is that lesson in invoking that Guru Tattva, that Guru principle, that Guru element, which is there in all of us, but not the one that we draw in our ego to say, hey, the Guru is within you, so you can just go and learn whatever you want. There is a way in which we learn, because we have to realize that our minds are really clouded. We are so stressed out. We are so completely, overwhelmed and caught up with so much that's happening that we don't recognize, we really can't discern. And that purity of mind, or that Chitta Shuddhi, that is what it is, right? That purification of our chitta, of our mind, is what is the process in which we also assess what authenticity is. We've already taken 5 minutes more, but before I close, Rahi, I know I'm putting you on the spot here, but if I may please invite you in, okay, just for a few words, okay, before we close.
Namaskaram, and thank you so much for doing this, because having learnt from a lineage and from great teachers, the Krishnamacharya Yoga Mandiram, I do believe, and I see the way yoga is being taught today and presented today, and having traveled around the world, it's painful to see this dissociation between what is authentic yoga and what is taught as yoga. And I think it's very, very important for us as people in this space to take the responsibility. And no matter, even if you're going to lose a few students, it doesn't matter. Stick to it. Stick to your authenticity. Say your lineage. Talk about your parampara. Talk about your sadhana. And have this relationship going with your students, not in the way of a kind of an invasive one, but always having care. The sense of care about them, understanding their background, and give them what they need, not what you think you should give them, but give them what they need. And this is something I learned very deeply from my teacher, Sri Deshika Char, who was there in my life, but never intrusive, always gave me what I needed in order to climb the path, to walk the path deeper so that I became whole and complete. He was not interested in the asanas I did. He was not interested in the chanting I could do or not, but he was interested in what was happening to me through my practice and my non-practice. So that I think is so important now, that teachers, or whatever we call ourselves, teachers, have this authenticity in their own practice, as well as transfer that sense of authenticity to whomever they are teaching, so that that is picked up. Not the asana, pranayama, ye, wo, everything, that all can come. That authenticity, the truthfulness towards oneself. And therefore, as you practice, it just radiates. Sometimes you don't even have to talk to them. They pick it up. They understand who is the authentic teacher. So I wish you all a great journey in this authenticity. I'm coming to the evening of my life. You're all just rising. So just radiate that truth, the beauty of lineage, of parampara, sampradaya. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha.
Thank you so much, Rahi. Thank you. And thank you everyone for your time, for your presence, for your patience. Thank you, Jyoti and Vikram, for your time and for your thoughts. It has been an absolute pleasure. And as you all can see, this conversation is just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more to talk about this, and we'll be having a number of questions. We'll be having a number of sessions as well discussing this. But before you leave, and thank you for the comments as well, and the posts that are coming in, and I will address if there are any of them that are addressed to me directly. But I will close with Purnamadaha before we end the session. Om. Purnamadah Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Shri Krishna Arpanamastu. Hari Om Tat Sat. Namaste everyone. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for your presence. Thank you for your participation. Thank you, everyone. Jyoti, Vikram, Rahi. Very, very grateful to all of you. And I will see you all soon. For those of you who are there, you can follow Vikram. I'm sorry I didn't put that there, but you can find him on Instagram, and you can see both Vikram and Jyoti's handles on my posts. So you can please go ahead and follow them. There's a lot of good work they do. There's a lot of lovely podcasts they've been a part of, conversations that they lead. I think there's a lot that you can learn from them. As for me, I am Lavina Rangel, the Curvy Yogi. You can find me also on Instagram at @CurvyYogiMe. There are a lot of conversations that I lead pretty unapologetically. Some people don't like me, but many other people love me just as much as I love them. And I don't really care, right, about the ones who are haters, because they will also eventually love, right? For the time being, I have friends, I have family, I have children, I have 2 dogs who love me, and they send all of their greetings to all of you. It is my absolute pleasure to be able to live that Swadharma, to share this conversation with all of you. And thank you for being a part of all of this. And I will see you all very soon. Hari Om Tat Sat. Namaste. And you can say namaste. Thank you.
Great one.